And as your teachers are handing out some guides for you right now, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to the program today. So I wrote down a few things just to share with you. So before we welcome our special guest here and give you a little more information about her, I just want to say that we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by this guest that we have here on stage with us. A woman who spent over 30 years as a licensed clinical social worker and a true agent of change. From counseling juvenile offenders and advocating before Massachusetts State's legislature for mandatory genocide education, her career has been defined by a commitment to justice and empathy. As you listen today, I want you to keep in mind three important things. Number one, the power of the living voice. We find ourselves at a critical crossroads in history. We are rapidly approaching a time when the generation of voices that lived through the world's most defining and most painful events will no longer be here to tell their stories firsthand. When we lose those voices, history risks becoming just a link on a page or a website. Today is about more than just a lecture. It's about witnessing a living bridge to the past before that bridge becomes part of the horizon. Number two, we want you to focus on our curriculum and our values. At Marshfield, we believe that education isn't just about memorizing dates. It's about engaging with diverse historical perspectives. This is core to our values at Marshfield. By understanding the complexities of human behavior, the kind of insights our guest speaker has gleaned from her work with the hate crime reform and legislation advocacy, you develop the critical thinking and empathy necessary to be leaders in an increasingly complex world. And the third thing I would like you to focus on is a local connection. Our guest who's joining us today isn't just a guest speaker from a distant city, she's a neighbor. She lives right here south of Boston, and her roots in our community run deep. In fact, her connection to our school started years ago. Opening chapter of her book actually highlights the connection to our schools. And she gave a presentation at Brook Middle School last year as well for our students. We had to relocate, but we're happy to have her here at Marshfield again. She knows our community, she knows our students, and she is back today. She believes in the impact everyone sitting here today can make. Our guest speaker's story is captivating because she's one of us, approachable, relatable, and deeply invested in the truth. So, I expect that you give her your full attention and your appreciation today. To introduce our guest speaker, I'm now going to turn this over to Jeff Smith from Facing History in Ourselves. He's going to give you a little bit more of a background.
My name is Jeff Smith. I'm in a group called Facing History in Ourselves, which is an educational group that started 50 years ago in Brookline, Massachusetts, and now we have offices throughout the United States, in Canada, as well as in London. And we work primarily with your teachers to help teach you about some key historical events, and one of those being the Holocaust. And we have when we work with your teachers to help present the material to you, to examine, for you to grapple with. We want you to look at not only and to know what the historical event was about, or events, or period, I should say, but also some of the emotional and ethical issues that a particular history, in this case, the Holocaust, triggers and should raise. And we have a motto that we've had since we began 50 years ago, and that is that people make choices, and choices make history. And as you will hear today from Janet's story about her survival as a hidden child in Poland during World War II and the Holocaust, there were people who made choices. People made different choices. There were people who were the perpetrators of the crimes against humanity, against the Jews and against other groups during the Holocaust. There were people also who, for various reasons, some out of fear, maybe didn't do anything, they just were bystanders. And then there were a group of people who made some choices to help people. Didn't necessarily have to be with a kind of red badge of courage. It could be sometimes looking the other way, but also could be taking risks themselves to stand up and try to protect people. And you will see and hear that there were some people who basically took that stand and helped Janet survive, and without them, she wouldn't be here today. And wouldn't be here to share the story. So you are members of a community, of your school community immediately, and you're making choices of what kind of school you want, how people interact with one another, and as you get older, you're going to be hopefully active citizens in whatever communities you live in, whether it's around here or move somewhere else, and those are choices that you're going to be making, and hopefully you will make the choice to engage as an active citizen. But right now, I'm going to turn this over to Janet and let her share her story, a remarkable story of her survival and her reflections on that. So, Janet.
I'm going to wait till Jeff gets back to the place where he's going to show some. Excited to be here, and as was mentioned, this is a very important and special place for me because my book, the setting for my book is Marshfield Middle School, and so I'm very pleased to be here.
Okay, Janet.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So I speak to thousands of people, mostly students, approximately 5,000 a year, with the hope that we'll promote greater awareness and understanding of the dangers of hatred, of prejudice, of any type of discrimination. And it's my hope that each and every one of us will stand up to any type of injustice. I speak about the Holocaust because it was one of the most vicious, heinous crimes in the history of mankind. As a result of World War II, approximately 60 million people were killed. Of that number, 6 million Jewish people were murdered because the Nazis had a particular hatred against Jews, and they were determined to destroy all Jews of Europe. 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered. Only 11% survived. And I was one of those very lucky children. So I was born in Krakow, Poland, and I lived with my mother, father, baby sister, Sarenka, in a little town 50 miles south of the city of Krakow. I lived there with a large extended family, grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles. I was the first grandchild in the family, so I was pampered and spoiled. I had an uncle, my Uncle Arthur. He had a motorcycle with a little sidecar. He used to put me in there, strap me in, take me to the candy store, take me for rides. I remember cooking and baking with my mother and my grandmother, preparing for holidays. By the way, my birth name was not Janet. My birth name was Gustava, and my nickname was Gija, which means baby. Throughout my childhood, my name was changed 3 different times. Also, my appearance had a lot to do with my survival because I looked like a typical Aryan child. Aryanism was a doctrine that was developed by the Nazis. They were trying to develop a master race, and they thought that people should have certain appearance: blonde hair, blue or green eyes, light complexion, and certain features, and I fit that profile. Well, my idyllic, wonderful childhood came to an abrupt end, September 1st, 1939. My father told me he was awakened at 4 in the morning. He heard explosions, so he turned on the radio, and he heard the announcer say that Poland was attacked by German army and that we were at war. So the first few days of the war were very chaotic and confusing. People didn't know what to do, where to go. My father sent me and my sister and my mother to my other grandparents' house in a different little town. When we arrived there, everybody was packing up their belongings and running away from the fighting, heading in the direction of Russia, so eastward. My grandfather packed some of our things onto a horse and wagon. We started this very difficult journey. And even though I was just 4 years old when the war started, I remember certain aspects of that trip. Because there were planes overhead shooting at us. We had to jump off the wagon and we had to hide in a ditch and wait till the shooting stopped. I remember seeing an airplane that was shot down, it burned and it crashed. Sometimes roads and bridges would be out. We had to cross the river by foot. And after a couple of weeks of very difficult travel, we arrived at our destination. In the meantime, my father and his brothers tried to join the Polish army to fight the Germans. But Poland was defeated in 1 month's time. And when that happened, my father and my uncles joined this caravan of people that was constantly streaming out of Poland and heading to Russia. When my father first arrived, he had no idea where we were because communication in those days was very difficult. Not many people had telephones, and certainly in those days there were no cell phones. My father advertised in the newspaper looking for us, and in time he was able to find us. Life in Russia was very, very harsh, very difficult. There was shortage of food, there was shortage of work. And I remember sometimes my mother and I would go to the forest to pick mushrooms. And my mother used to make this very delicious mushroom stew. I do wish I could have that again. And one day there was an announcement made that any men who needed a job should report at the town hall. My two uncles went that day. My dad didn't go because he wasn't feeling well. When my uncles arrived at the town hall, there was a marching band playing. They were made to sing nationalistic songs, and then they were marched to a nearby ravine, told to undress, and they were shot into that ravine. So that evening we waited for my uncles to come home, but they didn't. The other very tragic thing that happened to our family was that my sister, Sarenka, got very sick. She contracted diphtheria. Diphtheria is a disease we no longer get in this country because when you were babies, you were vaccinated against this terrible disease. But in those days, there was no vaccine. And she died. She was just 18 months old. After we were in Russia for well over a year, there was an announcement made that all these Polish people that crossed the border, there were about 200,000 Polish citizens that crossed the border into Russia. In order for them to be allowed to stay, they had to take out Russian citizenship. And my family was divided. They didn't know what to do, but my parents were afraid to go back to Poland because they thought once the war would be over, they couldn't get their property back. So they made the decision that we would go back. My grandparents said they couldn't go back because it was just too much for them. So they stayed. All the people that stayed were put onto trains and sent off to a region of Russia called Siberia, where they were sent for slave labor. When we arrived back in our town, at first, my father was arrested because the Nazis said that he was a communist because we came from Russia. Every day my mother would cook his meals and she and I would walk to the jail to bring my father his meals, his dinners. All Jewish people were forced to wear armbands to identify themselves as Jews. I remember one day, the Gestapo, the secret police, came to our apartment. They were searching for valuables, money, jewelry, furs, art, anything of value. They made us arrest and they just took whatever they wanted. My father heard that the Gestapo was looking for him. So they decided that we would try to escape. So one night, we took off our armbands and we went over to the train station. Train stations were very dangerous because that's where the plainclothes Gestapo, the secret police, would often be. But we were very fortunate because that night they weren't there and we were able to take a train. And we ended up in a town where my mother had relatives living. When we arrived there, we saw that the conditions of that town were very similar to what was happening in our town because the Nazis were very, very well organized. And my parents realized that it was not any safer for us to be there. So once again, they thought they could escape. So one night, my father got a horse and wagon. It was a very bright night. The moon was out. It was August 1942. And we climbed into the truck, into the wagon, and started to drive. But we did not get far because suddenly, in the distance, we saw Polish police approaching. They were on horseback. We quickly jumped off the wagon and started to run. You might wonder, why would we be afraid of the Polish police? Well, the reason for that was that there was a segment of the police called the Blue Police. They cooperated and collaborated with the Nazis. So we were scared. We started to run. We tried to hide in a potato field. But potato plants are very short. So it wasn't very long before they found us and they beat us up with these very long wooden clubs. And I was screaming, crying, my mother was crying, my father was pleading, please, please, stop. And finally, they allowed us to go back to our cousins. And at that point, my parents realized that they had run out of all options. There was no place to run to, there was no place to hide, nowhere to escape. And then they made this agonizing decision. They made a decision that hopefully to help me survive, they would give me away. So one day they sat me down and explained that I was going to go with Maria. Maria was a nanny to my cousin Miriam. They begged Maria to take me, and she agreed. So my parents explained that I was going with Maria, that I should be good, I should listen, I should be strong and brave, and that we would be reunited soon. So I said goodbye to my parents, and I left with Maria. To this day, I try to remember what that felt like, and frankly, I can't. I just know that I can't imagine what that must have been like, because I think about my own children, and I wonder, could I give one of my children away? And frankly, I can't answer that question. So I left with Maria. In the meantime, there was an order issued that the people from that town and all the surrounding towns had 3 days to report at an area outside of Krakow called Wieliczka. My parents made another decision. They decided that they would separate from each other. Their thinking was, if they separated, maybe, just maybe one of them would survive. So they left for this appointed place, and when they arrived there were about 12,000 people congregated in this huge, huge field. It was very hot because it was August. There was no water, there was no food, and there was nowhere for them to sleep. They had to sleep on the ground. And then there was a selection. The selection meant that there was a group of Nazi officers who made a decision who would live and who would die. Approximately 1,000 men were selected for slave labor. My father was one of those men. Another approximately 1,000 old people and children were taken directly to a forest. They were made to dig their own graves, and they were shot into the graves. And the last group was put into 53 boxcars marked with the letter B for the death camp called Belzec. About 150 people were put into each boxcar. It was so crowded, people couldn't sit or lie down. They had to stand for 5 days. When the train arrived, the people were taken off the train. Some people had already died because the floors of each boxcar was sprinkled with a white disinfectant When that got wet with urine, it gave off toxic fumes. The remaining people were taken directly to Izyast. This death camp existed for 6 months, and in that period of time, 600,000 people were murdered. Only 2 people survived this camp. Very tragically, my grandmother, my mother, my aunt, my little cousin Anushka, many of my family members were murdered in that death camp. So I left with Maria. Maria had an apartment in Krakow, and I remember so well being in that apartment because there were times when she would go out in the evening, leave me alone, lock the door, and go out. I was really scared because there was no electricity in the apartment. So I was in this pitch black apartment. I was crying. I was trying to unlock the door, and obviously I couldn't. One day there was a sharp knock on the door. Maria opened the door, and there was a Nazi officer standing there. He said, "I have orders to search your apartment to see if you're hiding any Jews." He barged in. He looked under all the furniture. He turned some of the furniture over. He came up to me, held up my braid. He wanted to know who I was. Maria very quickly made up a story. She said I was her niece, that she was taking care of me because her sister was sick. He accepted her story, and he turned around and he left. And to this day, I remember what he looked like. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and he was wearing shiny black leather boots. And I could hear the clicking of his heels as he went down the steps. Now, in the meantime, my father was sent to the Krakow ghetto. So a ghetto was a neighborhood that the Nazis selected, and they made everybody move out of that neighborhood, and then they put Jewish people into that neighborhood. So it was a very large area. It was all fenced in with a barbed wire fence. And so every day, my father and other prisoners were taken out and marched over to a cable factory. My father worked on an assembly line making electrical cables. He said he kept a photograph of me in front of him on his machine. And he said the only reason he wanted to live was knowing that he gave me away and he had to find me when the war would be over. He said that he and the other prisoners were starving, because all that they were given to eat was black coffee and a little piece of bread in the morning, and at night, very thin soup. He also mentioned he had a German foreman who every once in a while would slip my father an extra piece of bread, and my father was so very grateful for that. One day, Maria said, "Pack your suitcase, we're going." I didn't know where we were going. She didn't tell me. I was very obedient. I listened. She grabbed my suitcase. We took the trolley car, and we got off after a couple of stops, and we walked toward the ghetto. And as we approached the ghetto, I saw my father standing on the other side. My father put his fingers through the ghetto mesh of the fence. I held his fingers, and he said to me, "I love you, Gija," my nickname. I said, "I love you, Tatush, Daddy." I said, "Where is Mamusha, Mommy?" He didn't answer me. He just looked away, and I just knew I shouldn't ask any more questions. Suddenly, there was a woman standing right next to us, and my father said, "This is your cousin. This is your cousin Lala. You're going to go with her. You be a good girl. Be strong, brave, and we will be reunited soon." And very quickly, she grabbed my suitcase, pulled me away from the fence. I kept turning around, looking at my father, and very quickly he disappeared. So this was a cousin I had never met. She was a stranger. She was a young woman. She was living on falsified Christian papers. Her Christian name was Halina Valkowska. She was able to obtain a birth certificate from a Catholic priest of a little Polish Catholic girl who died. and I took on her identity. Her name was Kristina Antoshkevich, and I adopted her name. And my new nickname was Krisha. So my cousin was young. She was just 19 years old, very confident, very brazen. We used to take the trolley car in Krakow, and she would always tell me to be quiet, not to speak, not to say a word, because Polish people were forbidden to sit in front of the trolley. That was reserved for Germans. Polish people wanted to sit in the back. But because she was so brazen and she was always trying to test the system, we would sit in the front, and we were able to get away with it. We lived in another little town called Myshlenice. She was very mean to me, very cruel. She used to beat me with a fireplace poker. And when I cried for my mother, she would say, "Your mother is dead. She's never coming back for you." One day she beat me so severely that all my fingernails turned black. Some of my nails got infected. There was a nice neighbor, her name was Janina. I remember when my fingers were so badly injured, Janina made bandages for my fingers and she brought over some cream and bandaged my fingers. Sometimes my cousin would go out for a whole day. She would make me sit on the front stoop of the cottage where we lived. I'd be cold, I'd be sitting in my pajamas. And Janina was nice to me. Sometimes she would let me play with her baby Adam, and sometimes she would feed me if I was hungry. One day, my cousin said that she was going to meet her boyfriend in the city. So she had this Polish boyfriend that used to visit with her. But on that day, she was going to meet him in Krakow, and she took me with her. When we arrived in Krakow, she took me into a church, and she said, "You sit here, don't move." She said, "I'm going across the street to meet Victor in a cafe." So I sat in the church, and I waited and waited and waited. She didn't come back. Finally, I didn't know what to do. I walked out of the church. It was late afternoon. I saw that the whole street was cordoned off. I crossed the street. There were little groups of people standing and talking. And I overheard them say that the Gestapo had come and they arrested everybody in the cafe. So here I was, 7 years old, walking up and down the street, crying. I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, a woman came up to me, very quickly put me under her cape. She asked, "What's wrong? Why are you crying? What happened?" I explained that my cousin was in the cafe and now she was gone. I said, "Could you please take me to the bus? I thought I'd go back to the village where I was living." And she said, No, you're too little." So she took me into the building, same building where the cafe was, but upstairs, the apartment of a woman by the name of Alicia Goen. Alicia asked me, "Who are you? Where are you from? What happened?" So I practiced a story to tell if I was ever captured. I told her that I was the daughter of a Polish officer, that both of my parents were killed in a bombing raid, and I came from Warsaw, which was many miles away. Alicia accepted my story and said I could stay. However, I couldn't stay in that apartment for 3 reasons. One reason was that there was a Nazi officer living in the apartment building. Another reason was that Alicia's mother also had an apartment in the same building. She was very active in the Polish resistance. And in her apartment, she ran a hospital, she had shortwave radios, and she had ammunition. And the third reason I couldn't stay was when the Gestapo made an arrest, they always came back for the second time. So they were afraid to leave me there. So that early evening, the oldest son, Staszek, took me, and we walked for several miles, and we came to a farm that was owned and operated by the Catholic Church. And the administrator of the farm was Alicia's brother-in-law. So I remained on the farm. I remember one day we had slaughtered a pig, and they were cutting up the carcass in the kitchen. The kitchen was a mess. And suddenly there was a knock on the door, a neighbor came to tell us that the Gestapo was on the way. No, sorry, I made a mistake. The Polish group of police was on the way. It was not unusual for them to drop by to pick up cheese, butter, eggs, whatever they needed. So very quickly, they cleaned up the kitchen, they did everything in the attic, and we waited. And finally they came. And when they came, I was really scared because I was always afraid of the uniforms. Any uniform scared me. And because I was so nervous, I said, give them vodka. So they pulled out the vodka, they were serving it, and then I started to sing and dance. And so they were drinking and laughing at me, and I guess somewhat amused, and then finally they left. So while my father was still living in the ghetto, the Nazis were building a concentration camp called Poschel on the outskirts of the city of Krakow. And when that camp was completed, the Krakow ghetto was liquidated and all the people from the ghetto were sent to the concentration camp. So my father told me one night, in the middle of the night, he had to use the outhouse, or the bathroom. And he found a cigarette stub, and he was smoking. The guard saw him and shot him in the face. And the bullet lodged under my father's cheekbone, just right under here, and just stopped right there. My father couldn't get any medical treatment, so that bullet stayed there. So when we knew when the war was coming to an end because there was fighting all around the farm. And so the Allies were coming from the west and the Russians were coming from the east. And we were liberated by the Russians. So because they were fighting so much around the farm, it was decided that it wasn't safe for us to stay there. So we went to Krakow and we moved in with into Alicia's apartment. And I remember there would be times in the middle of the night, there would be a siren that would alert us that it was going to be a bombing. Very quickly, we had to put on our coats, light a candle. Everybody in the building walked down the steps to the cellar. It was a very large cellar with a dirt floor with wooden benches all around the room. We just sat there and waited until another siren told us that it was safe to go back upstairs. So when the war ended, we went back to the farm. And one day, there was a knock on the door, and there was my cousin's father. He found me, and he wanted to take me. I really didn't want to go with him. I was scared of him, just the way I was afraid of his daughter. But, he was my relative, and I loved the family I was with, and they loved me. But they didn't feel they had the right to keep me because he was my relative. So I left with him. Now, he also had falsified Christian name. His name was Dr. Antoni Krzyzewski. And when the war ended, anti-Semitism, which is prejudice against Jews, was very, very severe in Poland. So while I was still living with him and his wife, I had my first communion. That was done as a subterfuge so that we would look like a good Catholic family. One day he said to me, pack your suitcase, we're going. I did as I was told. I was always very obedient. I listened. He grabbed my suitcase and we walked for several blocks and we came to the Jewish Refugee Center. So we walked into the building upstairs. There was a lady sitting behind the desk. He introduced me, put down my suitcase, and he turned around and he left. I was just 10 years old. I was left at the refugee center. So now I would like to read to you a short excerpt from my book, Becoming Janet, Finding Myself in the Holocaust. As you can see, I have to read on a paper because I needed a larger print, and I'm 90 years old, almost 91. so I needed larger print. So this is chapter 14. They called us the upstairs orphans. We were Shirota. I learned that was what the grown-ups called us, the upstairs orphans. We were the children who had no parents. We had had parents, but not anymore. We had been hiding in closets, forests, outhouses, and under floorboards. Some were starved and beaten, or had been passed from stranger to stranger with false identities, like me. Each of us had a story, but we never spoke about what we saw or what we did, because the stories were too terrible. I learned that I wasn't the only one who'd been abandoned. 38 Buga Street was the last stop for Shirota like me. But we were the lucky ones, because at least we weren't dead. So I was there with about 70 children like myself, some a little older, some younger. Every day there were lists posted on the wall with names of survivors. And you can imagine that survivors coming out of hiding, whether concentration camps or hiding in the forest or wherever they hid. They were sick, they had no money, they had no clothing, they didn't know their relatives were dead or alive. So the refugee center was a place where they could get some help. So along came a woman. Her name was Lina Kupler. She came every day looking at the list, trying to find her own family. And she came across this room full of children and made a decision that she had to do something for the children. So in time, she was able to open 2 orphanages. And I remember the night we left for the orphanage. We had to leave in the middle of the night because there were men picketing in front of the refugee center carrying hateful slogans saying that we all should have been murdered. So we climbed into the trucks. One of the trucks was for children with tuberculosis and other infectious diseases because the Polish hospitals refused to take Jewish children. So I went to live in an orphanage in Zakopane, Poland. Only the high school age children were sent to public school. But every day they came back, they were beaten up by the Polish kids. Lina went to the school pleading with the principal and the teachers to please protect the children, but they didn't. And because Lina was so afraid that her home would be attacked, she obtained ammunition. The other orphanage was attacked 3 different times, and finally it was decided it was too dangerous to keep it open, so they closed it, and those children came to live with us. And one night, a Polish lady knocked on the door. She came to tell us that our home was going to be attacked. So the children took their positions on the balcony and on the terrace, and they waited. And in the middle of the night, Polish men came. They were on horseback, they were carrying fire torches, and they were shooting. The children were very brave, and they were able to protect their home. One day, Lina went back to the refugee center to pick up some provisions, and she overheard a man asking about his child. She said, "Could you describe what your daughter looks like?" He described a girl with long blonde braids, green eyes, and a birthmark on her left thigh. And she thought for a moment and said, "I think I have your daughter." She came back to the orphanage. She called me down to her office. I sat in this big chair. She came up to me and she said, "Krisha, can you please pick up your skirt just a little bit?" And she was staring at my birthmark. And then she said, "I have a wonderful surprise. Your father has survived." And I'll always remember the reunion with my dad. Because when I first saw him, I was so scared of him. He looked like a skeleton. He was just, he looked awful. And he was hugging and kissing me and telling me he's going to take me. I didn't want to go because for the first time I had friends. And Lina was our mother. We called her mother. My father was really sick. He couldn't take me right away. So he rented a room nearby. I saw him every day. We got reacquainted. And in time he was able to take me. And we By that time, 3 of my father's friends came back. They had survived. We moved into my grandparents' apartment over their store. The apartment was empty. There was nothing in there. It was just a shell of a place. And so, but we weren't safe there either, because there were notes posted on our front door saying we would be murdered. There were 2 of my father's friends who were driving in a car, 2 young men. They were ambushed and shot. My father went to the police chief asking for protection, and the police chief said all he could do is to give my father a gun. So my father slept with a gun. And very quickly he realized that it was too dangerous for us. So we left our town and we moved to Krakow. And by that time, my grandfather and my aunt and uncle returned from Russia. My grandmother didn't make it. She died there. One day, my father and I were walking in the park. We sat on a bench. He had a very serious look on his face. And he said, I have something very important to talk to you about. He said, the conditions in Poland are very difficult for Jewish people. There's a huge amount of anti-Semitism. We really cannot stay here. He said, you have 2 uncles. Your uncle Adek lives in Palestine, and your Uncle Jack lives in America. Where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to America. And he asked, why? Why do you want to go there? And I said, because I heard that money grows on trees. So it wasn't a simple matter as packing our bags and leaving. We had to get proper documents. We had distant relatives living in New Jersey. They were the ones who sponsored our trip to America. And basically, these documents stated that if my father couldn't support himself and support me, that the family would take care of us, that we would never become a burden to this country and have to go on public assistance. So in March of 1947, we sailed on a marine transport boat. The boat was called Marine Mountain. It was very rough crossing because the Atlantic is stormy in March. Everybody was seasick. I remember going into the cafeteria and putting a nickel into a vending machine, pulling out a Milky Way. I love Milky Ways. I loved them then, I love them today. The other food that I thought was magical was red Jell-O. I thought it was the greatest food. So we settled in New Jersey with my Uncle Jack and my new American aunt, Rose. So this was end of March. By early April, my uncle took me to register me for school. I was almost 12. I had never been to school. I knew how to read and write in Polish, but I didn't speak English. So he took me to Franklin Elementary School in Rowan, New Jersey. And right there in the school office, he said to me, what name do you want? You have to have an American name. I hadn't thought about it before, so very quickly, I came up with the name Jeanette, because we had a cousin who lived in Paris, France. She used to visit us in the summer. And her name was, she was very beautiful, very glamorous. She had long red nails, and her name was Jeanette. So I said to my uncle, Jeanette, and he turned to the school secretary, and he said, her name is Janet. So that's how I became Janet. And I was put into a 5th, 6th grade, a combination grade, in April, but by the end of school year, I was promoted to 7th grade, which was the correct grade for me. But we had another very serious problem. We came on a medical visa for my father to get his bullet removed. I was good for 90 days. We had another visa to go to Venezuela after 90 days. But the only thing that could keep us in this country is if my father married an American citizen. So the family looked around and they found him a wife. So in that very short period of time, I had a new stepmother, I had a new name, I had a new appearance, I had new friends, everything was new language. And I particularly remember my 8th grade, because my 8th grade teacher always referred to me as that little farm girl. I was trying to fit in, blend in, not stand out too much. But I was very, very fortunate because a group of girlfriends took me in, and they really were so good to me, these friends. They socialized me, and I'm so very grateful for them. I still am friendly with them. They live in New Jersey. Very sadly, some of them have died very recently. My friend Pat, that I speak every week with, she just recently died. And then, of course, I went off to high school, and I had a very good high school experience. I was a good student. I was very active in lots of activities. And I got on honor roll most of the time, except when I had geometry. There was no way I could get that subject. So I went off to college, and but then at age 19, I got married. So this was the 1950s when young men and women married very young. I promised my parents I would finish college, and I kept my promise. I carried a baby to class. It was difficult. Don't do it. But I continued my education, and when my children were older, when I got my bachelor's degree, when my children got older, I continued my education. I got my master's degree. So I know when I'm no longer here that my legacy will continue, because my children and my grandchildren will continue to tell my story. And I have a very special favor to ask you. How many of you think you could tell my story to someone who's never heard me? Come on, be brave. I see some hands. That's great, because I'm a witness of history, and now that you have heard me, you all are witnesses. And I often think about the people that saved me, because they were the true heroes. They did something very dangerous and very difficult, and yet they followed their conscience, their heart, and they helped this innocent child. So that has made me realize the importance of choices and decisions that we all make, because even the smallest acts of kindness has a ripple effect. So I urge you to be mindful of those choices and decisions. And it's so important for each and every one of us not to be silent, to speak out when you see any kind of injustice. So I'm going to end now, but I have another big favor, and that is, could you please follow me on Instagram? I know it's weird for a 90-year-old to be on Instagram, but I would appreciate that. And thank you so much. Thank you. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
questions that you had, take a look at your notes. Maybe think about what you'd like to ask Ms. Applefield. Again, it's a rare opportunity to talk to someone who has lived through history. So. Ms. Scanlon, my
Hero. Thank you. Okay, awesome. Thanks. Would anyone like to ask a question? I can bring the mic over to you. And that way Ms. Applefield can hear you. Excellent class participation. Hold. Could you stand up and say who you are? You can sit. Well, I think she'd like to see you. Go ahead, stand up.
I'm Colby. Have you revisited back to Poland and Russia before?
Yes, I've been to Poland, I think 5 times. Every time I've gone, it's been a little different for me. My first couple trips were very difficult. I didn't want to have a good time. I didn't want to go to any sites, you know. I didn't treat it as a vacation. The first time I went was early 80s, and I knocked on the door of the family that saved me. They didn't know I was coming. I just knocked on the door, and my family was downstairs, and I walked up the stairs, and they remembered me. You know, the parents were already gone, and it was an amazing reunion. Each time I've been back, I've spoken at the church where I was abandoned. I spoke at a museum. I spoke at the town hall in my hometown. So it's been very rewarding. And I brought my children and my grandchildren there also. And this August, I am very proud that I've been invited to be keynote speaker at the Oscar Schindler Museum in Płaszów, where my father was incarcerated. There's an exhibit called Children of War. I'm one of those children, so I'll be there to give a talk.
Thanks for the question. Do you have any more questions? Don't be shy.
just say your name.
I'm Austin. What was it like kind of rebuilding your life after the war?
What was it like to rebuild my life? Well, it was a new beginning for us. It was sad on the one hand that we lost most of our family, but very exciting on the flip side. And everything was new, and you know, my father and my stepmother bought a hardware business, and so they opened a store, and yeah, everything was very, very wonderful. I mean, I had good experience.
Great. We have some other questions. I saw some other hands. Well, we have plenty of time.
I'm Kai Hender. Do you ever revisit the places you once lived?
Yes, so I did. I revisited all the places that I had been to. I'd like to mention that my story has evolved over time, because at first I had no idea of what happened to my mother, how she died. So for many years I thought that she died in Auschwitz, which was the biggest concentration camp. Then I thought that she might have died where my father was. So I really wasn't sure. But in 2012, I was contacted by a young Polish historian who she was getting her doctorate in Holocaust studies, and she found me on the internet. As a result of that connection, she has done a tremendous amount of research on my family. So now I know exactly where everybody died. So before that I didn't. So I did visit Belzec, I visited Płaszów, and you know, the farm, wherever I had been, I could go back.
I'm Hunter Barone. Isn't it odd to think of how different the present could have been
Hunter asked, is it strange to think that if just one thing changed?
Exactly. I think that's an excellent question. Yeah, everything, if the woman didn't take me off the street, or if anything there was a reason or a purpose, or, even though my cousin was abusive, she served a very important part. Every part was important for me to survive. Glad you asked that question.
My name's Noah. How long did it take for you to adapt to your new lifestyle in America and learn English?
How long did it take me? I don't think it took me terribly long, because I managed. In those days, there were no services for the foreign-born as there are today. I had to learn English in school. My father went to the movies a lot. That's how he learned. And of course, my stepmother didn't speak Polish, and they communicated speaking Yiddish. And I don't speak Yiddish, so I had to learn. And so I did learn quickly.
What was going through your mind as like a child going through that? What was going through your mind as like a child?
Right, what was going through my mind? I was very confused. I did not understand what was happening. Nobody explained, not that I could understand it at such a young age, but I knew something bad and dangerous was happening. So my mother and my grandmother, people were crying, whispers, and they didn't want me to know, hear. So it was very confusing. By the way, I was hiding in plain sight. I always knew that I was Jewish, and I always knew that I had to keep it a secret. So, that I knew.
Did you ever reconnect with any of your friends from Poland?
No, because I was so young, and I didn't have any friends when I was on the farm. I was just there myself.
I'm Maddie. Was it scary coming to America and everything being so different?
Oh, that was Maddie, and she said, was it scary coming to America with everything being so different?
It was different, and it was a little scary because it was a new situation, but I was so good at adapting in different situations. So it wasn't, I guess I was a little nervous about starting school and not speaking English, but I was lucky because I didn't get bullied or teased. I had good experience.
Hi, my name's Connor. When you reunited with your father, did he have a tattoo on his wrist from attending prison camp?
Yes, he did. He had on his left arm, he had 5 twos, two, on his left arm.
My name's Sebastian. When was that moment of realization that you realized your life was in danger?
Is that what?
What was that moment that you realized that your life was in danger?
Didn't get the last word.
In danger. Like when?
When did I realize? Oh, I realized very quickly that I was in danger. Like when we were very, very, I was scared when we took the train. I knew that there was danger. So, all along I knew we were.
Here too. Some questions? Yes.
My name is Danny. How long after the war was it before you found out about all of your other family members who were killed?
I found out from my father when we were first reunited. He told me, what happened. happened to, we surmised that they had been, that when people didn't return, we knew something happened to them. But it was many, many years after that people kept looking for their relatives. Even in the early 80s, there was the first gathering of Holocaust survivors in Washington, and I remember going there, and I carried a big sign with my mother's name saying, has anyone seen my mother? So people kept looking for years and years and years, hoping that they would find their family members.
My name's Ronan. How long did you live in the Soviet Union until you left to go back to Poland?
How long? It was well over a year, yeah.
My name's Garrett. Do you know if your family ever thought about going to the U.S. before the war started?
Yes, when the war first, or there were signs of the war, there were many attempts by my family to get visas to emigrate, but countries were not accepting us. We couldn't. There were tragic. I have a bunch of letters that my family wrote, to each other and other people trying to find their way out, and very, very, very sad letters, and we could not get out.
I'm Abby. I was wondering, how do you think we prevent this from happening again?
She wants to know how we prevent this from happening again.
The important thing to remember is not to be silent. If you object, if you see injustice, there are marches that you can join, there are letters you can write, there are different ways that you can speak out. And I know that you're young and you're students. Sometimes these things are difficult because, first of all, the most important thing for you to remember is to be safe. Don't do anything that puts you in jeopardy. Whether you see something, talk to your parents, talk to your teachers, and figure out something that you can be doing. Being silent is like helping the perpetrator.
My name's Jacob, and I was wondering why you're moving place to place and switching your identity. Did you ever mistaken or forget which identity you're in?
No, I never did. I never forgot what I had to do. I guess it must have been so deeply ingrained in my brain that I did not forget.
I'm Colin. Did your father ever talk about his experiences in the prison camp?
My father and I did not speak very much about what happened to each one of us. I was always afraid to talk to him because I didn't want to upset him, and I'm afraid he felt the same way. And that was very true of other survivors. We didn't speak about this because what we lived through was really unspeakable, and often people in this country had a hard time hearing, what had gone on. So it took a while for people to speak out, and even publicly, I think it was in the early 70s when there was the first sort of a docudrama talking about the Holocaust and what had happened. So, it took a while for us to speak out.
I'm Nolan. During the Nazi occupation of Poland, did you or your family ever hear of or come in contact with any resistance fighters?
That I don't. I heard that Alicia, the woman that kept me, Alicia Gall, her mother was very active in Polish resistance. One of her children was helping also smuggling people out of Poland to the mountains into out of Poland. Poland has a mountain range called the Carpathian Mountains, and so people were being smuggled out. And,
Hi, I'm Owen, and I was just curious as to how you were able to recount your story so vividly despite being so young.
So I'm lucky because my father, after the war, my older son urged my father to write his diary. So my father wrote some stuff, and we have some letters, we have photographs, and I do remember a lot. So we have through other sources to get information.
Hi, I'm Matt, and I was wondering how long did it take for your father to make a full recovery from the camps?
Well, my father suffered so much. I remember as a child, we had a small apartment, and every night I would wake up to his screams. He had these terrible nightmares. He had some physical problems, he had heart problems, but emotionally, he was just a beautiful person, very kind, not bitter, not hateful, and he was my hero.
My name's Aurora, and I was wondering how you decided to write your book and like decided you wanted to start about this.
So for a long time, yeah, the question is how I decided to write the book. For a long time, I did not consider my story important or worthy because I didn't see myself as a survivor. I thought only the people that were in concentration camps, they were the survivors. But over time, people kept asking and saying, have you written this down? And when I first became reunited with my dad, he urged me to write everything down. And so, he wrote and I told him about my experience. So it was just a very gradual process that I decided that I wanted to write. And then my older son, David, he became a writer and he also urged me to write. So I started many, many years ago. I joined a memoir writing class and I just wrote stories and we would just read each other's stories and critique them. So that's how it started. But it took a long time. And I might add that this was a labor of love for my whole family because one of my grandsons, Isaac, he designed the cover, and my other grandson, Jacob, did the map in the book, and one of them does the website, and the other one does the social media. And then my daughter also is very involved in working with me. She also speaks with me every once in a while. And so my other son is also very much involved. So it's the whole family affair.
Thanks for asking that question, Aurora. I do want to tell you all that we have 2 copies of Ms. Applefield's book in our library. So if anyone is interested in reading it, you can check it out at the library, or when you're down there, you could read some chapters or enjoy that.
Yeah, and the first chapter, it's set in Marshfield Middle School, and there's a picture in there of me in front of the sign, the marquee.
Oh yeah, the Furnace Brook sign.
And it said, "Welcome, Janet Applefield," and that's in the book.
That's wonderful. That's a great connection.
I was wondering if you ever, my name is Matt, and I was wondering if you ever needed to switch languages depending on what identity you were using.
No. You mean currently? Or when you mean?
No, if you ever had to switch your language depending on where you were, because you know how you said you have different identities?
No, I never did that. I never slipped. No. I was awakened by cries and screams and dogs barking and German language. And I woke up, my cousin woke up. So this was a roundup. So sometimes the Nazis would come in the middle of the night, grab people out of bed and just take them away. So this was one of those. And my cousin was so scared she ran to the neighbor and you know, that was very scary.
My name is Kaylee, and I was wondering if it was hard for you to open up to people as a child because you were told to keep quiet for so long.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I was quiet, I was a little withdrawn. It was safer for me to be silent than to speak, that I could make mistakes. So, yeah, it took a while for me to develop my own personality. But as I said, once I think 8th grade was really what really helped me when, you know, my friends and they were so welcoming, and that's when I started to open up.
My name is Brennan. I was wondering how often would you have to lie or hide the fact that you were Jewish to other people?
How what?
How often would you have to hide or lie about the fact that you were Jewish to other people?
You know, at first, I was not comfortable being Jewish. I heard it was a bad thing to be. Why would I want to be that? So it was a process that I had to go through, and develop comfort in being who I am. As I said, it took a while for me to feel comfortable.
I needed extra steps today. Someone over here.
It's so hard to tell your story, even though it's bringing back these terrible times and memories you had.
Sometimes it's hard, especially in view what's happening around the world and in our country. Stirs up some sadness in me. Sometimes it's difficult.
What's the hardest thing you had to go through during that time?
Gosh, there were so many hard things. It's hard to look at. I think the hardest was leaving my parents, not seeing my mother again, and just thinking about how she died, and wondering, thinking about how scared she must have been, and all alone, that's the hardest, just thinking about her.
Do you still celebrate Jewish holidays? I know I have to.
Yes, we celebrated that.
Do you have a favorite holiday or tradition?
Hanukkah is fun because you get gifts and you give gifts. No, every holiday is something special to me. Yom Kippur is a sad holiday.
What was your determination to keep going during the war?
I think it was the fact that I had these wonderful memories of my early childhood, remembering the family, remembering all the fun and holidays and things I did with my mother and my grandmother.
If you could go back and change one thing that happened, what would you change?
One thing I would change would be to not go back to Poland once we were in Russia. If we stayed, we would have survived. It was not a good decision, but Nobody knew what to do.
My name is Justin. Do you think modern media is accurate at depicting the war?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough one. I'm not that savvy with knowing how to answer that. I don't know.
In America, have you ever met another Jewish person who went through the Holocaust?
Yes, so I met many survivors who, especially through facing history. So, yes, I have met them. Sadly, day by day they're dying, so there's fewer and fewer. And actually, you are the last generation that is hearing from a survivor. After your generation, there won't be any survivors left.
Yeah, and we have time for maybe one or two more questions, and then we have a little extra time for you to take some notes and things like that.
When moving to your different homes, do you remember what you did and what steps you took to adapt and fit into different places?
Do I remember what we did in the different places?
Like, do you remember what you did and what steps you took to adapt and fit into different places?
Well, I remember the farm. Being on a farm, you learn different things like milking a cow, or and there were times, good times, when I would play in the barn or climb trees, and I didn't have any toys or anything, I had 2 books, and I read them over and over and over on the farm. I had 2 books. That's what I did mostly.
And maybe just time for one more question.
Were you able to continue Jewish traditions or practices in secret?
Yes, so we do observe all the holidays.
Jen, I think the question was during the time, am I correct? Yeah. During the period when you were in hiding, were you able to celebrate any of the Jewish holidays?
Oh, during the war?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. No, obviously, no. I mean, the Christian holidays, I remember observing those.
So Miss Applefield has asked that we get a photo of her with all of you in the background. So Mr. Smith, would you help up on the stage? We'll just,
Drew, what's something you can take away from the presentation today?
One thing I took away from the presentation is that you never know someone else's story and what they went through in their life.
Luke, what's the most impactful lesson you learned today?
I just learned the struggle that people go through and the struggle that people get to make it to America, and it's really what makes this country great. We're built of so many different people, and it's just what keeps us going.
Something you can take away from the presentation is that you never know what everybody's been through, and it's history, so it's very important to learn about so it doesn't repeat.
I think the most impactful thing I learned was the fact that her childhood was ripped away, and how she never knew when her last goodbye was, and how sad that is.
Riley, what's the most impactful thing you learned from the presentation?
Probably about her experiences and just how she handled them in general, and just how much she fought to save her life.
I feel it's really important that we don't let the world become like this again, because this was just a huge tragedy. It impacted everyone, specifically the Jews, but around the world. I think we really shouldn't let this happen again.
I can take away that we should all respect each other, and hate has no place in this world.
I think it's very important to know about history to make sure nothing like that ever happens again in the world.
I think the most powerful thing I learned is that a lot of the events and things that all the Jews went through in World War II were very overlooked right now, and we should appreciate what they had to go through and how they were treated.
Dennis, what's the most impactful lesson you can take away today?
That we have to listen to other people's stories really and reflect on them to make sure that stuff like the Holocaust never happens again.
Just be thankful for everything. You don't need to go through that, so just be thankful for life.
Mr. T, what's the most impactful thing you learned today from the presentation?
I mean, I just overall think it's an amazing experience for these kids to be able to hear someone who's a Holocaust survivor. As she said, they're a part of the last generation to hear a Holocaust survivor speak. So I think it's an incredible opportunity for myself and for all the students to take in everything that she said, in a great lesson in making sure that everybody is included in the environments that they're in and making everybody feel welcome.